We're recording now.
Welcome. My name is Chris Chapple. I'm Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology at Loyola Marymount University. And I'm also the academic advisor for the International School for Jain Studies in New Delhi, where I normally teach each summer. And for the past many years, more than 3 decades, I've been conducting research into the Jain tradition. And what I will share today is the foundations and principles of Jain meditation. And we will, in a sense, take a journey through the centuries, through the history of Jainism, simultaneously encountering and performing reflections based on textual materials that have come through this remarkable course of the history of Jainism. Jainism, when people do know something about it, generally finds close association with nonviolence. And we will return to this theme of nonviolence again and again and again through these 4 different transitional reflective experiences, each divided into a couple of parts. So I want to start with just a little bit of context of history and geography. India is vast. It's 1,000 miles or more wide from the cultural area extending from Afghanistan all the way to the eastern reaches of Assam. And it's vast going north and south, 1,000 miles from Kanyakumari all the way up to the Himalayas. And as best as we've been able to figure from both some archaeological remains, but primarily narrative accounts, that Jainism originated in northeast India as the earliest of what we call the Shramana traditions. And I want to be a little bit more specific when I say northeast. We're talking about the environment around Benares and a bit north, and of course a bit south. And from this early narrative recorded in the Kalpa Sutra and the Acharanga Sutra that find written form by around 2,300 years ago, so about 300 BC, we get the written document. But from this written document, we know that there was a great teacher called Mahavira 2,500 years ago, whose family followed the teachings of this great Tirthankara, the 23rd Tirthankara, whose name is Parshvanath, an historically determined character who lived probably around 2,800 years ago, said to be the 23rd of a longer line of teachers for whom we're really not able to establish very much. So what we will do in this first segment is probe, what did Parshvanath teach? How was it revitalized by Mahavira? And how might we today, all of these 2,500 years later, find their teachings relevant, particularly in this time of pandemic? And I want to start by inviting you, as they make themselves available, inviting you to consider the birdsong, to consider the flowers, both the marigolds and the bottlebrush, to consider the yucca plant rising up above, and to invite you into this worldview that informs the nonviolence of Jainism. And it's a contemplative worldview grounded in a biocosmology. And from this very earliest literature, the Acharanga Sutra, we know first and foremost that Jain meditation invites us to recognize our emplacement within the universe, to recognize and acknowledge the direction south, to recognize and acknowledge the eastern horizon, the place of the sunset, to recognize and acknowledge the western horizon, the place of the sun, sunrise in the east, sunset in the west, and to recognize and acknowledge the emplacement of that abode of the North Star. And in India, the geography is quite profound and remarkable, with the Himalayas beckoning with their snow peaks to the north, Kanyakumari inviting people to reflect on what is possible in the warmth of the south, and the sun rising to the east and setting to the west. Jambu Dvipa, this is the continent upon which humans find home. And as we awaken through contemplation, through reflection, as we awaken in a way that early Jain literature documents, we discover that we are in the company of countless numbers of living beings. And the Jains perhaps are the first to put forward the ideas of samsara and moksha. The Jains, looking very carefully, saw the presence of life within the human, saw the presence of life within each and every bird, saw the presence of life called jiva within the worms beneath the soil, within the squirrels running across the branches of the tree, saw jiva within the large elephant, the ferocious lions and tigers, saw jiva, saw life itself in its particularity within so many forms of expression. And redirecting gaze from the human realm and the animal realm, they looked even more carefully at the soil and saw within soil, saw within rocks, living awareness, a consciousness present within granules of soil and sand, and consciousness present in the company of majestic mountains. So let's let that be our first contemplation. Contemplate through your memory, or perhaps even gazing about your current place, how the earth speaks in so many wondrous forms. And this becomes the entry point for the contemplative life. And similarly, Mahavira in the Acharanga Sutra said, look at water, look at the flow of water, look at the forms of water. Water can have a consciousness within an individual drop of rain, and water can have an evanescent consciousness presented through the rolling and the roiling of the waves of the ocean. Water informs and assists life as it complexifies. And the Acharanga Sutra advises, contemplate the presence of life within each and every form, each and every encounter with this ever so precious element that gives us life and sustains our lives through hydration, allowing us to absorb that nutrition through our saliva, that nutrition, that food that arises from the earth. These are what are known as eyes wide open meditations. We use physical presence. We use our ability to see and recognize and name and establish relationship with Jiva in all of the manner it surrounds us and supports us. And next we come to fire. And we see through photosynthesis transforming the brilliance of flower, transforming that energy from the sun into this remarkable display of color, of form. And like this, we see with our eyes the rising sun. We absorb the warmth and radiance available to us through the southern sky during daylight. We can see and reflect and celebrate the beauty of that radiant tejas, the beauty of that presence of Agni at sunset. And we also, in the dark of night, see that glimmer of the belt of Orion, the Cassiopeia, of the Big Dipper, which points to the presence and the radiance of the North Star. And we can also think analogically about this third great element, the Mahabhuta of light, of warmth, of heat, is an idea, a light bulb that goes off in our head, and in India in particular. Every autumn, Diwali, the great celebration of light in all traditions, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Jain, Christian, everyone celebrates the presence and the power of fire. Again, eyes wide open contemplation. We're getting close to making a couple of COVID-19 connections, particularly as we move into an acknowledgement of air. Air, prana, the life breath that energizes. Vayu, the wind that surrounds us. And just as Mahavira, building on insights from the traditions of Parshvanat, suggested that there is life in the soil, there is life in rocks, life in mountains, just as he continued to see that there is life in living water, life in the particles of energy that come directly and indirectly from the sun. So also, he said, there are jiva to be found in the bodies of air that take the form of a zephyr, that take the form of a breath, and that this life of breath, this life of vayu, presents an occasion for very particular and very subtle awarenesses, moments of consciousness. All of this contained within the fifth great Mahabhuta, within the enclosure of space. And hopefully you just caught that beautiful pigeon, that beautiful mourning dove, making its way through space, fluttering, moving, celebrating the presence of life. Now, on top of and within these five great elements, the Jains articulated two forms of life that, just as all of these elements possess the capacity to receive and to feel touch, take aspects of those elements and granulize into bacteria and viruses, which for thousands of years have been recognized, named as Nagodha. And the Jains, going back thousands of years, have very carefully made certain that these Nagodha, which can and will carry disease from time to time, or themselves be disease, smallpox, Suchika, as we know in India, they said to keep these away from doing harm, layer 7 muslin cloth pieces and filter your water. And even today, this is an effective way of guarding against disease. And they also said, take up the mupati, take up the mouth covering, for two reasons: to avoid inhaling and doing harm to bugs, but also to filter the bacteria and the viruses. And also the mouth covering is designed to do no harm as one speaks loudly into the airways. So these bacteria, very powerful, needed for our alimentary tract, needed in order to give us the immunity that provides our needed survival. But at times like this, Jain wisdom has the prescription of how, through social distancing, to keep one safe at a place of remove. There are people within the Jain faith that take up vows of monasticism, where the mask becomes regular, everyday behavior, where touching becomes very judiciously applied. Even to touch a plant would be considered a potential act of harm. And these very activities of renouncing movement are social distancing to keep us safe and to keep the world safe from our presence. So I'd like to close out the first part of this segment with a reflection for a couple of minutes, and you're invited to linger with each of these at your leisure, but to reflect on the abiding presence of earth and the plants that take expression through the earth and from the earth. I invite you to feel the wateriness of your mouth, to reflect on the water that you have taken in, or the tea, or the juice. Reflect on the need for water to sustain human life, and to appreciate your ablutions, your cleansings, to appreciate the life made possible through the life of water itself. And I invite you to reflect upon the glow of light, to reflect upon the good heat of the human body. When the body is in distress, it throws up a fever. Appreciate the warmth and relative coolness that you're able to build for yourself, as well as to reflect upon the beauty of color, the radiance received into the eyes, and to give honor to the life present in the energy of heat. And to feel the breeze, to feel the air as it comes in, the basis for so much later meditative practice, to feel the air as it flows out, and to feel how this life-giving force surrounds us and upholds us in every single way. And to feel the ways in which you find it possible to create and inhabit sacred space. To find a place of beauty could just be a little niche in a room, and to build it and return to it. For Jains, their biocosmology includes always a geography of temple, particularly for those who observe Murti Puja, where they will be within walking distance of a temple where they can present themselves, and we'll talk about this practice, present themselves to exemplars, present it with artistic beauty to inspire the type of calm and the type of peace most revered within Jain meditative practice, revered within Jain lifestyle practice. So let's sit with the place of remembrance, of mindfulness, of the weight of our earth-born body upon our chair, upon our seat, on our cushion, recognizing our intimacy with all of the many lives to be found in earth and soil and food. And reflect upon the presence of life within flowing waters, the blessed raindrops of the monsoon, the flow of the Yamuna, the Ganga, the Hudson, the Genesee, the Sacramento, the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, so many rivers. The marvels of the Gulf of Mexico, of the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea. Water. 75% of the world's surface, more or less, and an almost equal amount of what sustains human life. And then reflection and remembrance of light, of the sun, of heat, of color reflected in so many different forms. And of air and breath. That blessed exchange of oxygen coming in, carbon dioxide going out, and with our remarkable plants absorbing our carbon dioxide and through photosynthesis releasing oxygen. We live always in a symbiosis, a reciprocity of life. Created always within space. Now, with this foundation, I'm going to transition to a place brought forward by this reflective engagement with biocosmology. And as Mahavira spoke, later written down a couple hundred years later, but remembered for so many couple hundred years, as he spoke, he said, the jiva finds so many forms of expression. The jiva returns one birth to the next. And our job as humans with conscience, humans with awareness, is to come to see that whenever we hurt a living being in any form, that harm committed, that violation of a life that exists on Jambudvipa, that violation hurts us. That whenever we hurt something or some being in thought, word, or deed, we in turn inflict injury upon ourselves. And Mahavira set up 5 gates. The 5 gates, vratas in Jain literature, the yamas in yoga literature, and the paramitas, or let's just call them vows, in Buddhist literature, all shared in common, that unfold as follows. The first full description that we have of the observance of Ahimsa comes from the Acharanga Sutra. And Mahavira proclaimed, be kind to animals. And he gave very specific instructions to the monks and nuns. Don't even point at animals because that will generate fear. It takes a long time for animals to trust human beings. And he brought forth this principle of ahimsa, which is a beautiful word, a word to be remembered, a word to be repeated again and again and again. And it means to back away from the desire to do harm. The verb root is han, which is the same word expressed as the word hunt in English, which means you track something down and you kill it. And he says, resist that temptation to do violence. Do no violence. This is the universal truth lifted up in later Hindu and Buddhist traditions. The Mahabharata, beautiful chapters describing the practice of ahimsa. In Buddhist teaching, again, this is the primary practice to be observed. And upon it were built 4 other meditative, ethical principles. Now, on the one hand, it may seem quite obvious. If you hit someone, if you hit another human being, that will generate anger. It generally would arise itself from anger. So you have to understand anger in order to not dole out violence. But then it requires systemic analysis. It requires both reflection on personal choices, and it requires an analysis of how society becomes structured. And first and foremost, for the Jains, thankfully living in an environment where the legumes, the pulses had been brought over from Ethiopia. Okay, Indian agricultural archaeology is really quite fascinating. But early on, thousands of years ago, a diet was developed, a mix of pulses and grains that provides the full complement of protein that is needed for human survival. And particularly in the old days, when before the rise of veganism, the milk of the cow was welcomed into diet. This made it possible thousands of years ago for the Jain community to perfect a non-violent diet grounded in vegetarianism. And this eventually became a prestige diet, and it became a way for a good, even today, about 20% of the population of India will gravitate toward the not killing of the chicken, the not killing of the cow, the not killing of the goat, both in terms of diet and in terms of religious practice. The animal sacrifices were lamented, and other forms of worship emerged that intertwine attention to an altar with inner resolution and resolve to do no harm. And then reflection on one of our most powerful appendages, probably our most powerful appendage, we know this from the Rig Veda, is the goddess of voice. When we speak words of harm, we cause injury that comes down through generations and generations. And the second great vow, the second Mahavrata of Jainism, of yoga, of Buddhism is to be mindful always to do no harm in the words that one utters. One of the great meditations, and I invite you, I've been training and practicing yoga for, this must be my 50th year, and for many decades, many years, this involved the practice of weekly silence, a day of speaking no words, and a day of thereby avoiding any particularly inauspicious mode of expression that might possibly have created hurt in the mind and heart of another person. And then that takes one a little bit more profoundly, gambhir is the Sanskrit word, more profoundly into that place of silence that provides the ground of protection and safety. Satyagraha, lifted up by Mahatma Gandhi, took it yet another step and said what we now phrase to be, we must speak truth to power. The Jains have spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years campaigning against violence to animals, advocating vegetarianism. And similarly, what Mahatma Gandhi did was he called out those British economic policies that took food off the tables of the common people of India when they were commanded by their colonial rulers to grow cotton, to grow indigo, to feed the market. So many lives, millions and millions of lives lost. And Gandhi had the courage to speak up in the name of nonviolence. And this relates very nicely with the next Mahavrata, the next great vow, which is the vow to not steal, asteya. Recognize one's need, food and shelter, a little bit of entertainment and happiness, perhaps supporting for a time in your life, as have I, a beautiful family. And then recognizing how much more is needed for human flourishing. And at this time of COVID, and we are, of course, all concerned about those for whom food and shelter are now on the line. But so many families have discovered the joy of simple living. So many families have rediscovered cooking together in the kitchen. So many families have discovered that they need not take those fossil fuels that have their origin in the sun and burn them up to go hither and yon. And perhaps, as economies revive, we'll be a little bit more prudent and perhaps even a little bit more generous, acknowledging that so many aspects of modern lifestyle rob the earth of its resources. And perhaps we will learn to take and even steal a little bit less. And then the fourth vow has to do with pleasure. And pleasure, honoring pleasure, has a time and a place. And to honor the great elements, to celebrate all of the life available in all of its different forms in the universe, is a meditative practice unto itself. And in marriage, there's a celebration of this remarkable joy that comes through a vowed relationship between a man and a woman. And in modern times, a vowed relationship, perhaps. And the Jains were the first to really name that third sex reality, that some pumsa, men, have stri, women-like attachment, to honor in a committed relationship this abundance of joy possible, but to keep it within the vrata, to keep it within the bounds of vowed faithfulness. And for those, the Svetambaras, who take on the white clothing, or the Digambaras, those monks who vow to go naked, they take a vow to abstain from carnal pleasure and to take joy instead in celebrating all of the varied forms of life, and through that vow to protect all of those various forms of life, as well as to protect oneself from the harm that would come from violating that vow. The Me Too movement, it's all about being clear with what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Develop the conscience needed, and this will provide protection to yourself and provide protection to those who surround you. Comfort in front, comfort in back, comfort from the past, comfort in the present, comfort in the future, if one abides with proper comportment. This itself becomes an ongoing meditative engagement and reflection. And then the fifth remarkable vow, aparigraha, or gra, cousin word of the English grab and grasp. Pari, grasping all around, holding, hoarding. It's mine, it's me. I am the car that I own. I am the this, the that, the other thing. Giving that all up. For the Jain monks and nuns, they take a vow. Perhaps Digambara men, nudity. And for Svetambara men and women, and for Svetambara, for Digambara women, they take a vow of radical simplicity. And the meditation nudge within Jainism is be that radical. Integrate that radicality into what is possible, even as a layperson. So think prudently about what is needed. And in my own yoga training some decades ago with a teacher from Calcutta, we were given a sadhana, an aparigraha sadhana, where every day we had to fill a sheet of paper with a list of things that we owned. And if you think of it, if you were to itemize every garment in your wardrobe, that would fill one sheet plus more. If you were to list all of the food stuff in your kitchen cabinet, that would fill more than one list. If you were to list every dish in your cupboard and every pot and pan, that would more than fill. If you were to list every item of furniture in your bedroom alone, and then move on to the living room, that would be a couple of more days. And if you're a scholar like myself, if I were to list all of the thousands of books that have attached themselves to me over the years, oh, goodness gracious. And if we were to take it to the bare necessities of life, what an amazing meditation. What do we have? And what do we really need? And what this COVID-19 social distancing has done is re-establish for us an intimacy with what we have. We know nooks and crannies of our homes in ways that probably we've not experienced since the day we moved in. And it gives us pause. It gives us a reflective space through all of these 5 vows to re-examine, to perform a meditation in Jainism advised daily called parikrama, where we do a moral inventory. And they'll leave us a few minutes of meditation of what in Quaker tradition is called the query. We interrogate ourselves. In what ways might I be complicit with violence in my day-to-day life, or complicit in societal violence? Take resolve. In what way do my words serve and uphold truth? Who checks in on the words that I utter? What impact do my words have within the world? What impact do the words of others have as they speak law, as they speak decorum, as they speak about and model human behavior? Third query. In what ways do I take more than really belongs to me? How much energy do I rob of the sun? How much metal do I require to be dragged up out of the earth? How much food do I purchase that just gets composted? Not stealing. Fourth query, am I dignified in each and every interpersonal exchange? Do I lift up the dignity in my regard for the bodies of others? And then the fifth inquiry, how much is enough? And I'll leave you with words attributed to Gandhi. There is enough in the world for everybody's need, but there can never be enough in the world for everybody's greed.